So today I have my cowl off and my engine cover, so I thought I would make a quick video talking about how the N54 PCV system works. We'll talk about how it works, why it's there, what the problems are, and some of the options that some vendors sell. So a quick introduction to what a crankcase vent or a positive crankcase vent is. All combustion engines, the piston, when they are running, there will always be some combustion gases that make its way past the piston ring. No engine is a perfect seal, no cylinder and piston is a perfect seal. If it was, it wouldn't move. And some combustion gases, air fuel mixture, will always make its way past. This positive pressure has to be vented out. If it wasn't, it would just find the weakest link, probably the front main seal, maybe oil pan gasket, valve cover gasket, something like that. The amount of blow-by that gets past the piston rings will depend on how old the engine is. If you have a really old engine that's barely had any oil changes, then you will have lower compression than, say, a brand new engine. So this pressure has to be vented out. So what's unique with the N54 and most turbocharged cars now is there's two sides to the PCV system, the vacuum side and the positive side, usually called high and low. So to understand the low side, when the car is idling, when you are gently accelerating, and when you let off the accelerator pedal, the car runs in a vacuum state. You are under vacuum 95% of the time when you were driving. The only time you're not in vacuum is when you are literally using boost. So when you see on your MHD gauge, when you see a negative value in inches of mercury, that is because the throttle body is mostly closed. The intake of the piston, the intake stroke of the piston going down causes a strong vacuum in here because the throttle body is mostly closed, because we're idling or gently accelerating, creates a vacuum in here. So what happens is, inside here in the cylinder head, just behind the intake manifold, there's 6 little holes called head ports. So what happens is this vacuum that's generated in here travels up through those head ports. It comes along inside the valve cover and it makes its way up through this tiny little passage here. This is an actual restriction that BMW purposely put there, and it gets to your PCV valve here. Now fortunately I actually have a valve cover here, so you can see where this ends up, these holes here. This here is actually what's called a Cyclonic Separator. It's basically a built-in catch can. Now if I flip this over, what I was talking about, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. 5 and 6 are close to each other. This vacuum congregates here, makes its way up here, and it gets to your PCV valve. This is a PCV valve. It's literally just a check valve that sits in there. This vacuum sucks on the PCV valve and opens it. So this PCV valve is now open. Then the vacuum makes its way in through the Cyclonic Separator, you can actually kind of see it here, and applies a vacuum to the engine. It actively draws out crankcase gases. Now you may be wondering, what about here? What about this vent, which you can see here? Well, this vacuum gets to here. Now this is the flapper valve. The vacuum sucks this valve closed. This valve does not let any air go this way, only lets air go that way. Now it's important to note, and I actually have an example here, there is a small hole inside the flapper. You can actually see that hole there, the small hole. So even when this is closed, that hole is still there. And that lets a little bit of fresh air come through. If that hole wasn't there, the amount of vacuum that occurs in this intake manifold, which is usually around 11 inches of mercury, would be applied directly to the valve cover and the engine, and it's too strong. So what that would actually cause is like a squealing sound. It's usually a vacuum sucking on weak points on the valve cover gasket, the front main seal, your oil pan gasket. So it's quite a precisely metered system. Now, when you are under boost, throttle body is open like that, and there is a positive pressure inside here. Whatever boost you're running will be in here. So what happens is that boost goes through these holes, up through here, and it gets to the PCV valve. Now remember what I said, the PCV valve flows that way, it doesn't flow that way. So if I blow on this, it'll shut. So that blocks any positive pressure getting past there. So what happens is the positive pressure that's building up in the oil pan, in your crankcase, and there's quite a lot more of it now because there's boost. The boost naturally on the compression stroke of the pistons, you know, because we've got actual boost in there, it's going to force more combustion gases past the piston ring, more air fuel mixture, and, you know, condensation, stuff like that. Anything that's in the air will make it past. And what happens is this positive pressure gets up here to the top into your valve cover, you know, usually like up through here, and will go that way, and it will open the flapper. Remember, the flapper opens that way. Remember what I said as well, is this positive pressure in here that gets to the PCV valve, it shuts the PCV valve. Positive pressure makes its way here, opens the flapper, and vents to your rear inlet. If you're wondering what this thing is, that is just a dumb heater. It's not got any control to it. It's literally just a heater, and in freezing conditions it just prevents any condensation, it prevents ice forming. Not really a problem unless you're living in the Arctic. So that's the basic way that the PCV system works. So the question is why do we have two sides to the PCV system? If when under boost and even when idling, this excess pressure, why can it not just all be vented here? Well, that is what essentially happens when you run a Pcv delete kit. So if you delete this valve in here and you block it off, and you just have let's say a pipe that comes out there, and to a catch can, a little filter, even though it's blowing outward, that is a Pcv delete, and it will still work to an extent, but we need to ask ourselves why the vacuum side exists at all. Now the reason for this is because specifically on the N54, the turbos are really small. Even Chinese 17T, 19T turbos are very small. The cartridge is very small inside, and oil flow is actually very, very low under low load conditions. So idling, gentle cruising, gentle acceleration, oil flow is really low. A lot of people seem to think that it's like a hose pipe, and it's not. It's like a trickle. So the reason why the vacuum side exists, where it's actively applying a vacuum on the crankcase, is this helps the very small trickle of oil that's actually going through the turbos to drain properly. Without this vacuum, it doesn't drain properly. And so what happens is the oil can back up inside the turbo's core. And when that happens, it'll sit against turbo seals. Turbo seals are not designed to actually hold like a quantity of oil against it. It's just supposed to seal as oil flows past it, and then that causes smoke. The longer that this happens for, eventually turbo seals will fail, and that's why everyone tends to think that N54 turbos, especially some of the Chinese turbos and other options, a lot of people assume that this built very poorly when it's not. It's because the PCV system isn't functioning properly. Now, why might it not function properly? Well, on a very old motor, as I was saying earlier, as mileage gets up, your compression drops, the piston rings are more worn, so you get more blow-by that makes it past the piston rings. Now, as I said before, there's a small bypass inside here that when you're on the low side, when you are under vacuum, it meters it. So some of that vacuum will draw fresh air in and it balances everything out so that it doesn't draw an absolute vacuum on the seals. This works perfect for a brand new engine or an engine with some miles on it. The standard BMW specification is 17 millibar of vacuum. Now on my engine here, I've measured it with a little nipple here and a manometer here, or manometer. This engine here at 93,000 miles with 160 psi compression runs 8 millibar of vacuum. So for cars that are particularly low compression, or just very old cars, it is a fact, they will drop compression over time. Eventually it gets to the point where no vacuum is applied to this crankcase. The exact same happens when you run a Pcv delete. If you fit a Pcv delete and vent to atmosphere fully, that exact same thing happens, and then that prevents the turbos from draining properly. Another benefit of having the low side Pcv system is that at idle, at cruising and gentle acceleration, the vacuum on the crankcase actually helps piston ring seal. It actually helps basically increase the amount of compression that you have under these conditions. Now this is important because without that you get more blow-by, you get more air-fuel mixture that makes it past. More air-fuel mixture that makes it past, that's more fuel that can dilute your oil. So another reason why you want to maintain both sides of the Pcv system. Now a potential solution to this, which I don't really want to get too much into the solution because it's an entire topic on its own, is to increase the amount of vacuum. Now you can do that by partially blocking off the little hole that's in here, or fitting a complete check valve here and having a vacuum relief fitted somewhere or something like that. But that's a topic for another video. This is just to explain how the Pcv system works. Another thing that's worth mentioning as well is if you have a cracked valve cover and you have a hole somewhere in this valve cover, that's a vacuum leak. So when you are under vacuum conditions, there is less vacuum applied to the crankcase, and it's basically like having half a Pcv delete. So that's why a fresh valve cover is very important. It's also worth mentioning as well that these holes and the small channels inside here can clog up over time, especially if you're following long life servicing. There's a lot of deposits in the oil. It will build up in there over time, because remember, 90% of driving is under vacuum, uses the vacuum side Pcv system. So let's talk about some of the options that there is. I want to go through a few of the big ones. So the main thing that a lot of people do is the Berger Motorsport catch can. This basically puts a catch can right there. That's all it does. And the only time that you are going to catch anything is when you are under boost. So that's the only time that you'll catch oil. It won't fully fix the problem. I should have mentioned that a problem with these Pcv systems is when this positive pressure vents out, it usually carries, despite the separator that's in here, it carries oil with it, it carries fuel mixture with it. And the problem that causes, as we know, is the intercooler can gunk up with oil, and our intake ports, unfortunately, when the vacuum side is running, also can get a build-up of deposits on them. So that's the reason why people run catch cans. But yeah, as I say, that's all the BMS can does. Now, there is another option for the vacuum side, which would be the RB External Pcv Kit. What this basically does is it puts a fitting in here. Now, it's important to mention that this fitting blocks this tiny little passage. When you fit the external PCV or Pcv Delete Kit, you block this tiny little passage here. Okay, and I'll get to that in a second. The external PCV kit basically comes out, and it uses a connection on the tank vent line which connects to the intake manifold. You can't really see it. It places a check valve, which is basically takes your Pcv valve, which was internal, and it puts it externally like that. And then what happens is it functions exactly the same, except instead of being built into the valve cover here, and you know, with the head ports, basically the vacuum in the intake manifold comes out. It's got an external Pcv valve. It sucks it open and makes its way to here and functions the same. The only reason that you would want to do that is to run a catch can for the low side, and that is where you will catch most of your oil, because 90% of the time the car runs under vacuum. Now, some people seem to think as well is that you need to plug these head ports. As I just mentioned, when you fit an external PCV or a Pcv Delete Kit, the fitting comes in here and blocks this passage and comes out. No boost or vacuum that comes up through the head ports and gets to here can get to the engine when you run an external PCV or a Pcv Delete fitting. So the only reason why you may want to block your head ports or plug the head ports and literally tap your cylinder head is if you run, say, huge boost and you are concerned that, say, 30 psi that comes through here is going to push against the valve cover gasket here and, you know, potentially leak or something. I've never ever seen this happen. It's a precautionary move, kind of unnecessary if you ask me. So we've talked about the external PCV. What about Pcv Delete? Well, as I say, what they do is it basically is just a fitting that goes in here, comes out to a catch can and vents to atmosphere. If you do this, you lose all vacuum on the crankcase, your turbos won't drain properly, and over time the seals will start to fail, oil leaks past, you get white smoke, and you blame it on Chinese turbos, when in reality it was a vendor who doesn't know what he's talking about, and he sold you rebranded Chinese parts and deleted your PCV for no reason. There is no reason to delete your PCV valve or system or anything. The only concern that you may have is fitting an oil catch can. Berger Motorsport now do a dual catch can kit, which applies a catch can between here, and it also makes an external PCV system and puts a catch can there as well, so you have dual catch cans. It's quite a good kit. It's expensive, but that will fix the oil build-up problem. Methanol helps too. That is the only downside to the PCV system. Also, as I mentioned, as engines get old, the system can become inefficient, but that's a topic for another video. There is a couple of vendors on the groups who will try and sell you Pcv Delete kits, and they argue that they've fit loads of Chinese turbos, they've fit loads of Pcv Delete kits, and they've had no issues. Remember that your seals in your turbos will not fail overnight. It will happen gradually over time. There is literally no reason to fit a Pcv Delete kit, and they're basically just conning people. And you know, maybe in 2017 everyone thought that Pcv Delete kits were the thing and PCV had no use at all, and now people are starting to realise with these turbos that vacuum is essential, it's needed, and there's no reason to mess with the system. Now, you may be wondering about the Pcv valve, replacement valves that literally just go inside there. Well, they are quite a good idea, because as you can see, the standard Pcv valve is it's a bit flimsy. Now, this is an old Pcv valve. I've actually blown on this and it leaks a little bit, to be totally honest. So if they leak or they don't seal properly, any boost in here, when it gets to the Pcv valve, will seep through, and that can cause your crankcase to pressurise, which is not good. That is very bad. So replacing with a RB PCV valve or a BMS PCV valve is a good idea. It's preventative maintenance. They're a much more sturdy check valve. That's all you need to do. If you're concerned about oil build-up, or if you're running a really high power N54 and you want to prevent any oil under boost kind of going into the system, which will lower your octane a bit. Octane is a big issue with high power builds. As I say, you can run a catch can, and that's it. That's all you need to do. Some people may be wondering here, does the rear turbo cause a vacuum? Does it suck on this pipe and assist with the venting when you are on the high side under boost? I don't know, to be honest. No one knows. No one's done any testing on that. BMW in their technical documents seem to think that it does. I don't really think that the rear turbo is going to apply a massive vacuum here when it can literally just come here, and that's the path of least resistance. So that's my answer to that. So in conclusion, for the PCV system, all you should really do is replace this valve with a RB valve or a BMS valve. I would also recommend replacing the flapper, because over time this flapper in here, it goes like that, can kind of get a bit sticky, which my old one was. And then after that, if you really want to spend some money, consider the Berger Motorsport dual catch can kit. Or if you already have a BMS catch can here, you can get the RB External Pcv Kit and get the Mishimoto catch can that goes with that. That's it. In my opinion, there is never any need to plug your head ports, because remember, if you have an external PCV here or anything that fits right in there, you block this passage and the air's going out that way anyway. So yeah, that is the N54 PCV System Explained. And the takeaway is, don't buy the misfire race PCV deletes.